Welcome to the Believer's Voice of Victory from Kenneth Copeland Ministries. Download the notes at kcm.org/notes.
Hello everybody, I'm Gloria Copeland. Welcome to the Believer's Voice of Victory. Billye Brim's back with some really interesting insights into some things you'll be interested in. Billye, we're glad you're here.
Thank you very much. And we're looking at the book of Ezekiel. And in that book, Ezekiel came over with the first exiles that Nebuchadnezzar took. Daniel came along, the brightest and smartest Jews came along, and it was some years before the temple was destroyed. He started prophesying to the Jews in exile in Babylonia that it's going to be destroyed. They didn't like that, but then one day a runner came. He was an escapee, and he said the temple's been destroyed. Then after that, it was a crushing blow, because the temple and the glory, that was their connection to God.
Yes.
And they thought, it's all over. But then Ezekiel changed. And the middle part of the book of Ezekiel, he gives judgments for the nations around about them. And then the last part, and we're going to get into this tomorrow, he starts in with the prophecies regarding the future.
So were the judgments a result of
how they treated Israel?
Yeah.
Yes. But right now we're going to look at a book. Oh, this book is just a treasure. It's out of print. It's named Mother of the Pound, and it's by David Kazaz. And David Kazaz is a medical doctor, and he's the daughter of this woman, Mother of the Pound. And he gives the history, the life and history of the Iraqi Jews. And of course, these Jews left Israel, went over into Babylon, present-day Iraq, where they remained from the time of the first temple until the middle of the 20th century. They didn't do like the Jews that were in Europe. They didn't move from place to place. They were always in this same place. They went in there for the 70 years of the Babylonian captivity, and then Cyrus, in 522 BC, Cyrus said, you Jews can go home and you can build your temple. So they went home to build the second temple. Ezra the scribe and Nehemiah, you remember, went to build the wall, but only 42,000 Jews went with them. The vast majority of the Jews decided to stay in Babylonia. And their descendants would remain until the middle of the 20th century.
My.
And they always, kept to themselves. They were a separate people. And so they kept the traditions of the temple times. And I really like this book because it gives so many things from the temple times. And it explains some things which I told you about yesterday about the angels of peace. And I'm going to read you some excerpts from this book, Mother of the Pound. Now, it's called Mother of the Pound because these Jews were there from the time of when the temple was destroyed, and they were there to the middle of the 20th century. What happened in the middle of the 20th century? Israel became a nation. And when they became a nation, Iraq kicked out the Jews and told them, you have to leave here. And they confiscated all their goods, stole what they had, and they were wealthy. Jews always had that blessing of wealth upon them. Right. Stole everything they had and gave them 1 British pound. So they had to escape and they had to go, and this is the story of his mother.
How long had they been there?
They had been there from 546 BC until 1948. So 2,000 years.
That'd be terrible to be
2,000 years. So, it was good that they came home, though. And so David wrote about his mother, and it's so enlightening. I'm going to read you some of the things about this, which throws light on Ezekiel and the book of Ezekiel. And David writes, my people's long and proud history in what is now Iraq dates back 2,500 years to the Babylonian exile of 586 BCE. At that time, the elite among the Jews of Israel were exiled by the god king Nebuchadnezzar of Babylonia, who hoped to distance them from their first temple and ultimately from the worship of God. The exiled Jews crossed the desert and proceeded to establish, under the spiritual leadership of the prophet Ezekiel, a thriving society in Babylonia along the shores of the Euphrates River. 50 years later, Persia's King Cyrus came to rule over Babylonia and offered the Jews a chance to return to Israel and build their second temple. Those who stayed along the Euphrates and those who returned to their homeland established dual, vibrant Jewish centers. The ones who stayed in Iraq, there was this huge Jewish center in Babylon, and then those who went to Jerusalem. But hard times lay ahead for both groups. The Jerusalemites would lose their temple, while the Babylonians would have to contend with a number of invaders, some beneficent, some oppressive, over several centuries. After Muslim Arabs arrived in the 7th century, remember that's when Muhammad came along and conquered all up through there. After Muslim Arabs arrived in the 2nd century to rule Iraq and establish their capital in Baghdad, most of the Babylonian Jews moved from outlying areas and settled in the city. Depending on the whim of the Islamic ruler at the time, the Jewish community either flourished or retreated into a self-protective mode. The Mongols followed and brought good fortune to the Jews at one time and misfortune at another time. The Turks came, and their effect was also mixed, some good, some bad. Some nations in their time of glory created vast empires by military conquests and included Jews as their subjects. However, these conquests did not force the Babylonian Jews to wander from place to place, as other Jews would do over their long histories. Rather, the Babylonian Jews remained in one region for centuries and maintained their society with linear continuity. Consequently, they would be both the heirs and the guardians of traditions with deep and extensive roots. All the way, when I was in Israel studying Hebrew, I had a teacher, and he called himself a Babylonian. He was a Babylonian Jew. They were very much more spiritual. They had stayed to the book more and to the first temple times more than the Ashkenazi Jews from Europe. Perhaps this is why the spiritual aspects permeated and indeed defined so much of my life in the Baghdad community of my youth. Now, Shavuot, he's writing about a pilgrimage. There were 3 pilgrimage feasts that the Jews were supposed to go up to Jerusalem, to the temple. Well, they can't go up to Jerusalem, to the temple. They're in Babylonia. The temple's gone. But here's what they did in Babylon. Shavuot, which we are in right now, the 2nd day of Shavuot, the 2nd day, I'm talking about when we first broadcast this, September 29th now. Shavuot, like all Jewish holidays, begins in the evening. Since this occasion celebrates the giving of the 10 Commandments, the Torah, the Word, the first evening is spent reading biblical and rabbinic passages and prayers and remembrances of the dead. In our house, all members of the extended family gathered together, bringing candles. Women prepared coffee and special drinks. In Iraq, during the 1930s, masses of Jewish people made the pilgrimage not by foot but by car to Kifl, the burial place of our beloved prophet Ezekiel. And so we'll be showing you some pictures of Ezekiel's tomb. Now, this is going to play a big part in some things I'm going to bring up about some stone tablets that were found there. So Kifl was a small town, and this is where Ezekiel's tomb is, composed of mud houses and a few brick buildings with narrow serpentine dirt alleys meandering in between. Most of the alleys led to the small river that coursed through the town, a tributary of the Euphrates. As religious pilgrims, our focal point in Kifl was always Ezekiel's tomb, which was situated in a little dome building, part mud, part brick, with thick walls and only a few windows. And so they came there. There were shops and markets set up all around. And at this very time of the year, Shavuot, the Jews who were in Babylon, in Iraq, would make their way, not to the temple, they can't go there, but they would make their way to Ezekiel's tomb. That's how much they revered him, because he was a priest and a prophet, and he became their contact with God. In the center of the burial building was a small dark room containing Ezekiel's tomb. The tomb, some 8 feet long, 4 feet wide, and 6 feet high, was overlaid with several ornate covers on which Hebrew inscriptions from the Bible were embroidered. Only 6 or 8 feet separated the tomb from the walls of the room. And he can remember as a little boy going in there and smelling the candles and seeing all these things. In a custom, and I'm asking them to show you the tomb again, in a custom shared by Jews and Muslims alike, all visitors to this dwelling took off their shoes before walking over the carpeted floor of the sacred room. As I entered the room, my ears caught the whispered prayers of fellow visitors. Each person would squeeze as close as possible to the tomb, kissing it and murmuring his or her prayers and petitions and vows. The crowd moved slowly around the tomb in a counterclockwise manner. Others, most often men, stood at some distance from the tomb, reading psalms in hushed tones. This is what they would do. It's page 26, Gloria. This is what they would do at Ezekiel's tomb. In the same building, but outside Ezekiel's tomb, there were tombs of renowned rabbis and who died a century or two from the prophet's death. So, next to last paragraph I'm going to read, Gloria. The exile of the Babylonian Jews from Jerusalem did not really cause a disconnection after all, and the destruction of the temple did not destroy the people. Defeat in the Battle of Jerusalem did not ultimately vanquish the people who had fought so valiantly. To the contrary, Ezekiel and his inspiration helped the people to maintain and indeed even strengthen their connection to God and their faith. That was the secret of their survival. Now I want to move, Gloria, from talking about Ezekiel's tomb to what I call and what David Lewis called the amazing Ezekiel Tablets. David Lewis was probably this is going to be on page 10. David Lewis was probably the foremost prophecy teacher in the Assemblies of God. And when I knew him, our hearts just clicked together. And when David Lewis passed away, he said to me, do not let go of the Ezekiel tablets, the Ezekiel stones. And he told me to contact a man named Yehuda Oppenheim. And so after David departed, I contacted Yehuda Oppenheim, a brilliant man. His uncle was one on the Manhattan Project with the atomic bomb. He was one of the most brilliant men in Israel. They tested little Israeli children, and the ones that tested to be geniuses, they sent him to a little class that Yehuda taught, and he taught them to think.
Well,
he taught them how to think. He even taught me, because I worked with him several times closely on these Ezekiel tablets. Now, what are the Ezekiel tablets? I'm reading from David Lewis's article that he wrote in 2006, and this will be in the syllabus you get. David Lewis writes, just suppose that somewhere in the Holy Land there is a manuscript of one of the books of the Bibles that is so ancient there could be no older copy of that book, simply because it is the original from the hand of the prophet himself. There are researchers in Israel who believe that they have found the original copy, the original book of Ezekiel. It is engraved on stone tablets. Is this possible? Here is much of the evidence. If this theory can be proven and brought to public light, it will be the most amazing and astounding archaeological discovery of all time. Many years ago, he met a man named Shlomo Rosenbaum, who told him the story of the Ezekiel stones. Now, they're going to be showing you the Ezekiel stones so that you can see them. And if somebody could hand me a copy of our offer, I want Gloria to see how they are, how it is raised. What happened was, they have sheiks of Arab tribes. Thank you very much. No, the other one. Sheiks of Arab tribes. And they went into Ezekiel's tomb, which we showed you Ezekiel's tomb earlier. and they stole these, I think it's 64 stone tablets. They're just about a foot each dimension. Here is a picture of them, Gloria, as they are on a rack in the place where they're stored in the BVOV Institute. But I want you to look, Gloria, right here on the cover of our study syllabus. This is how the letters are. The letters are rather small, and they are raised. They're not carved out into the stones. They are raised from the stones. It's really very difficult to see how it could have been done. Now, these stones were in the tomb of Ezekiel. Robbers came in there because they liked to rob antiquities and sell them. They came in there and robbed these stones. Then the sheik got very sick, the one who did it. He associated in his mind, like we would say, the curse of opening the tomb in Egypt or something. And he sought out a doctor, a pharmacist in Syria. And he said, if you make me well, I'll give you this archaeological find. So he gave him all these stones. The pharmacist eventually died. It ended up in the hands of his female relative who was a Christian in Syria. She called, I think it was an Orthodox priest. He took a look at them and he said, this is the book of Ezekiel. And they have come out of Ezekiel's tomb. He said, the Jews need these. Well, Israel was not yet a nation, but they were fighting to become a nation. And during that time, it is quite a story. Now, I've worked with Oppenheim. I have been to the place where these are stored. I have read all the files. And people took their lives in their hands, especially a man named David A. Cohen, to get those stones from that lady during times of fighting and battle into what would become Israel's. And they came eventually into the hands of a man who was president of Israel, an early president, BVOV, and they are now stored there in his institute. I have looked over these stones with Yehuda Oppenheim. Yehuda Oppenheim has departed. But I met with his son recently, another brilliant man. And Yehuda, though the archaeologists, they were checking the dates of the stones and all this and that, Yehuda was the only one who was checking the content. What did they say? How does this line up with our book of Ezekiel? We don't have any original books of the Bible. We don't have any original books of the Old Testament. We don't have any original ones of the New. We have copies of copies of copies. Now, what we have in the Dead Sea Scrolls are still copies of originals, but they're very, very old. They're like 2,200 years old. This is older than that. And what we believe, what Yehuda Oppenheim believes, what I believe is that this is the original book of Ezekiel. And he believes that there are codes in it. Codes that have to do with the end of days. Codes that Israel needs to find lost things, to find truths. And when he, and I've been with him, Gloria, in my little very primary elementary Hebrew, he has shown me how that these stones differ just a little bit from the Bible and the copy of Ezekiel that we have today. They differ in tense. Like in the first chapter, it says in the days of King Jehoiakim. It doesn't use the word king because everybody knew he was the king. And then rather than saying a prophet has been among you, it says a prophet is among you. So it's written present tense.
Interesting.
Yehuda left earth before we really got over to the prophetic chapters. I was just about to tell him, let's skip over to those prophetic chapters. And he was up in years, and he left. So I am believing that his...
So you worked with him on this?
I worked with Yehuda Oppenheim on this. Many times I would go there, I would go to the... Maybe they have a picture of me with these stones. I don't know if they sent one up with me and the stones. If they do, show that one again. And it's just amazing to see them. My son said, Now, here's another interesting thing about these stones, Gloria. Some of them are marble. Look and see if you can see it in this picture here. Not so well. Some are marble, some are granite, and some are basalt. And the basalt is a black rock from lava, you know, from volcano. And the parts of Ezekiel's book, which tell how the Israelites sinned against God, what they did in that holy worship. They actually worshiped the sun in the Holy of Holies. That's what brought this dire judgment upon them. And you know, judgment, it can do good things, because Israel never got into idolatry after this judgment, after this time when they were sent into Babylonian captivity. But the parts, and I think this might be a black basalt rock right here, I don't know. But the parts of where they really sinned and their worst sins are told, and God tells that He's going to destroy the temple, those are on the black rocks. And then the ones that are good and prophesy wonderful things, they're on the lighter stones. So these are very interesting, these Ezekiel tablets. And I believe that they are for this time, they are for this last day. That's also what the other people that are mentioned in this article, which will be in that, you'll see the article when you get the study syllabus. And they believe that there will be found like secret messages, you know, in the Bible codes about where the ark is and different things.
Interesting.
So it's very, very interesting. Actually, I can leave that with you.
Oh, Billy, so
bless
good
the Lord.
to me.
But
Thank
the one
you.
I'm doing here is going to be very much better.
Well, I want that too. So this is the one
This is the new one. This is the one we're offering.
Okay, good. Good. Well, that's great. Aren't you interested in this? Billy and I'll be right back.
We hope you enjoyed this teaching from Kenneth Copeland Ministries. Download the notes at kcm.org/notes.